The Ohio winter night was cruel, its cold cutting deeper than any blade, and I felt it seep through the thin fabric of my coat as I lay curled up in the cramped trunk of our family's old sedan. Every breath I took came shallow thick with the suffocating stench of gasoline and rust. The trunk was a coffin without air holes, dark and absolute, swallowing every flicker of hope. I pressed my palms against the cold metal above me and pounded until my knuckles stung, but my fists made only dull thuds, and the car absorbed them like a grave, no sound escaping into the night. My throat burned from screaming, yet no one came. In that tomb of steel, silence became my enemy. My chest rose and fell in panicked bursts, and I was only 20 years old, but in that moment I felt as powerless as a child. Outside, muffled through the steel, I heard his laugh. My brother Mark Mitchell, 3 years older, stronger, drunker than ever. His voice carried a twisted joy that chilled me more than the icy air. "Sleep tight, little nurse," he jeered the words, sliding through the cracks like poison. "Dad says this will teach you respect." Tears welled in my eyes. I was studying nursing, working part-time as a CNA, doing everything I could to build a future. Respect was all I ever tried to give, and yet here I was treated like garbage by the very people who should have protected me. I kicked, pounded, begged. My voice cracked until it was nothing but hoarse gasps. I imagined running out of oxygen, my lungs clawing for air that would never come. Claustrophobia wrapped around me like a second set of chains. My heart thrashed violently in my chest, the sound so loud I thought it might explode. I pressed my ear against the metal wall, listening desperately for footsteps, for any sign of rescue, but there was only silence and Mark's fading laugh swallowed by the night. Minutes bled into hours. My body stiffened, every bone aching against the unforgiving steel. The cold gnawed at my skin, numbing my fingers, my toes, even my thoughts. I prayed to stay awake, prayed not to drift into the dark abyss where breath would not return. My body shook violently, partly from the cold, partly from terror. Time became meaningless. I lost count of how many times I whispered, "Please, God, help me." My tears froze against my cheeks. I thought of my textbooks left open on my desk, of the exam I had next week, of Megan, my best friend, waiting for me at class. Would she wonder where I had gone? Would anyone ever know what happened if I never walked out of this car? Finally, as dawn bled across the horizon, faint light seeped through the edges of the trunk. My lips were blue, my body stiff when I heard footsteps crunch across the frozen driveway. The sound was heavy, authoritative one I knew too well. The trunk clicked, then lifted, and the sudden rush of pale morning air filled my lungs with burning relief. I blinked against the light. My father, Richard Mitchell, loomed above me. His suit was perfectly pressed, his tie knotted with precision, as if the cruelty of the night had never touched him. He looked down at me not with horror or concern, but with irritation, as though I were an inconvenience interrupting his day. My body trembled uncontrollably as I pulled myself up, gasping for air, my face streaked with tears and grime. I expected comfort, at least the minimal instinct of a parent seeing their child nearly frozen to death. Instead, his lips curled into a dismissive smirk. "It is just a joke," he said coldly. "Do not exaggerate. You are too dramatic." The words sliced sharper than knives. A joke. My suffering, my terror, reduced to entertainment. Behind him, I glimpsed Mark leaning against the porch, a bottle dangling loosely in his hand, his grin smug and triumphant. The truth hit me with more force than the freezing night air. In this house, pain was comedy, silence was demanded, and my worth was nothing compared to their pride. My father's voice echoed inside my head louder than my own desperate thoughts. A joke, nothing more. But as I staggered out of the trunk, every muscle screaming in protest, I made a vow deep inside myself. One day, someone would see the truth. One day, this would not be hidden behind laughter and lies. One day, their jokes would turn to shame. For now, I stood shivering in the weak light of morning, my body alive, but my spirit splintered, knowing that my family considered my torture nothing more than play. The nightmare was only beginning. The Mitchell family was admired in our small Ohio community, but admiration was only the mask they wore for the world. Inside the walls of our two-story house, truth rotted quietly like mold beneath the paint. My father, Richard Mitchell, at 58, had built his reputation as a respected hospital board member. To neighbors and colleagues, he was the image of stability, a man who donated to local charities and gave polished speeches about family values. To me, he was a dictator dressed in a suit, obsessed with appearances, punishing anyone who threatened to tarnish the picture he worked so hard to paint. My mother, Helen, 55, drifted like a ghost in his shadow. She was soft-spoken, polite, always ready with a nervous smile. She spent her life ironing out wrinkles not only in clothes, but in problems, pressing every conflict flat until nothing showed on the surface. To outsiders, she was gracious and supportive. To me, she was silence. A silence that cut deeper than screams, the silence of someone who watched her daughter's bruises fade and called them accidents. And then there was Mark. My older brother, 23, had failed out of community college, bounced between dead-end jobs, and found comfort at the bottom of bottles. Yet in my father's eyes, he could do no wrong. He was the heir, the golden child, the son who carried the Mitchell name. When he stumbled drunk through the door, Dad laughed it off as youthful fun. When he shouted at me, pushed me, demanded money, Dad called it brotherly teasing. And when he locked me in the trunk overnight, Dad called it a joke. I, Laura Mitchell, was 20 years old, a nursing student fighting for every grade, working part-time as a CNA at the hospital to scrape together tuition. I stayed in this house not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. Rent was impossible on my paycheck loans already drowned me, and moving out without financial support was not a luxury I had. My father knew this. He reminded me every time I defied him. Without this house, you would be nothing. Remember who keeps you clothed and fed. Those words shackled me tighter than chains. Abuse did not appear overnight. It crept in like fog, each incident disguised as play or clumsiness. I remembered the first time Mark snapped a textbook across my head during high school finals. I had cried out dizzy, but Dad smirked and said, "Boys, roughhouse. Stop being sensitive." Another winter, Mark shoved my face into a snowbank until I nearly passed out my chest, seizing in panic as the ice burned my skin. Mom pulled him off at the last second, but instead of anger, she whispered, "Do not make a scene, Laura. It is siblings playing." Each time my pain became invisible, rebranded as jokes lessons or my fault. I learned to swallow it, to stay quiet, to believe maybe I was too dramatic, maybe I was the problem. That was the culture of silence in the Mitchell family. Silence was demanded at dinner when Dad spoke of his influence at the hospital. Silence when Mark slammed doors and cursed. Silence when Mom pressed a cold rag to my swollen cheek and said, "Be quiet for peace." Over the years, silence became the air I breathed, heavy and toxic. I watched how differently we were treated. Mark crashed Dad's car once while drunk, and Dad's lawyer handled it quietly. When I borrowed the car for a night shift and forgot to refill the tank, Dad yelled at me for a week about responsibility. Mark missed bills, Dad paid them without a word. I saved every cent of my CNA paycheck yet. Dad accused me of being selfish when I refused to hand it over to cover Mark's debts. Every glance at our family portraits on the wall made me nauseous. There we were, smiling on the church steps, Dad's hand firm on Mark's shoulder, Mom clutching her pearls, me standing slightly behind, plastering on a smile that felt like a mask. To the town, we were perfect. Inside, we were poison. I grew up thinking that maybe this was normal, maybe every family had secrets behind their walls. But as I studied nursing, as I learned about trauma, as I read textbooks about identifying abuse, I started to realize the truth. What I had lived with all these years was not discipline, not sibling rivalry, not overprotective parenting. It was abuse, systemic and deliberate, woven into every word, every silence, every laugh at my expense. And yet, trapped by tuition bills, by my father's control, by my mother's complicity, I stayed. Each day I told myself if I could just survive a little longer, finish school, earn my degree, then I would be free. But survival was never enough in the Mitchell house. Survival meant enduring another of Mark's drunken rages, another of Dad's dismissive smirks, another of Mom's whispered commands to be quiet. It meant stitching my own wounds with thread of lies, convincing myself that someday things would change even as they worsened. Now, after the night in the trunk, I understood that silence was not just dangerous. It was deadly. It started with money as it always did. Mark's voice thundered through the hallway one Saturday morning, slurred with the residue of last night's drinking. He cornered me in the kitchen while I was still in scrubs from my overnight shift at the hospital. His eyes were bloodshot, his breath sour, and in his hand he held one of my pay stubs. "You make more than you need," he spat. "Give me half. I have debts." I backed away, clutching my backpack. "That's my tuition, Mark. Without it, I cannot stay in school." His laugh was cruel. "You think you're better than me, little nurse. You owe this family. You owe me." Dad's footsteps echoed as he entered the room, his face stern and cold. "Family means sacrifice," he barked. "You are selfish, Laura. You will give him what he needs." My chest tightened. I wanted to scream that I was already sacrificing that every sleepless night shift, every bruise from lifting patients, every dollar I saved was sacrifice. But in this house, my words were worthless. Instead, I lowered my eyes silent. Mark snatched $40 from my purse and stormed out, and Dad did nothing. That was when I began recording. I hid my phone in my pocket whenever arguments erupted, capturing Dad's demands. Mark's threats, Mom's silence. I told myself one day these files might matter, that maybe proof would protect me. But proof was only numbers and voices, and I had not yet learned how to make anyone listen. The pressure grew heavier weeks later when Mark arrived drunk with a stack of loan papers. He slammed them on the table in front of me. "Sign this," he ordered. My heart dropped as I scanned the words. A cosign for thousands of dollars money I did not have risk, I could not bear. "No," I whispered. "I cannot. This will ruin me." His face twisted red with fury. He grabbed my wrist, squeezing until my skin burned. "You will sign," he hissed. Dad appeared again, looming like a judge, his eyes cold. "Do it. This family's survival depends on loyalty. Loyalty does not mean slavery." I choked out, my voice trembling but firm. It was the first time I had pushed back the first crack in years of silence. Mark's grip tightened, but when I refused to pick up the pen, his rage boiled over. That night, he stumbled into my room reeking of whiskey. Without warning, he dragged me by the arm through the hallway, out into the garage and toward the old sedan. I kicked and screamed, but his strength was fueled by fury and alcohol. The trunk gaped open like a mouth, and before I could escape, he shoved me inside, slamming it closed. Darkness swallowed me again. From inside, I could hear Dad's voice, calm and dismissive. "He's just joking, Laura. Do not ruin the family reputation with your dramatics." Those words pressed harder on my chest than the metal trunk lid. I realized then that my father's control was not only about power, but about silence. He demanded it at all costs. Silence when Mark stole from me. Silence when he bruised me. Silence when he locked me away. Silence so the Mitchell name stayed untarnished. My screams that night echoed only to the walls of the garage, bouncing back to me like proof of my isolation. No one came. No one ever came. And as the hours passed, as my body froze and my spirit fractured, I understood that silence was not protection. It was permission. Permission for them to do worse, to push further, to break me completely. That realization planted something new inside me, a seed of resistance, quiet but unyielding. They thought they had locked me into silence. They were wrong. The morning after the trunk incident, I dragged myself to the hospital for my part-time CNA shift, every step aching from the bruises on my ribs, my breaths shallow as if knives pierced me from the inside. I thought I could hide it under my scrub top and a smile the same way I had hidden every injury for years, but Dr. Susan Harris noticed the moment I walked through the ER doors. She was a seasoned physician in her 40s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, the kind of doctor who had seen too many lies dressed up as accidents. She stopped me as I pushed a supply cart toward triage. "Laura," she said firmly, her eyes narrowing. "What happened to you?" I froze, clutching the cart. My instinct was to deny, to shrug, to laugh it off. "I am fine," I whispered, forcing a smile. But even as I said it, I winced when the cart brushed my side. Susan stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You are not fine. You are struggling to breathe. There are bruises along your neck. Who did this?" My heart pounded louder than the monitors beeping in nearby rooms. If I told the truth, Dad would find out. He sat on the hospital board. He had influence. He could destroy my future with one phone call. It was nothing, I muttered, looking at the floor. Just clumsy. Susan did not buy it. She tilted my chin gently, her touch firm but kind, and studied the dark marks near my jaw. Her eyes softened, but her tone stayed steady. "Laura, I have seen too many young women excuse bruises. Do not let silence bury you." Her words pierced deeper than my father's threats because they were laced with genuine concern. For a second, I wanted to tell her everything to collapse right there in the hallway and let someone else carry the truth. But years of conditioning wrapped around my throat like invisible hands choking back the confession. I swallowed hard and shook my head. "Please, just let it go," I begged. Susan did not push further in that moment, but I saw resolve flicker in her eyes. She was not fooled. As I walked away to begin rounds, my body heavy with exhaustion and fear, I realized something had shifted. For the first time, someone had looked at me and not at the excuses. Someone had seen the bruises for what they were. That night, when I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I replayed her words. "Do not let silence bury you." They echoed louder than my father's commands and Mark's taunts. The thought that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out, a way for the truth to be heard, began to grow inside me, but fear still held me prisoner. What if I spoke and no one believed me? What if Dad used his power to turn it back on me? What if silence was the only thing keeping me safe? The questions circled endlessly, but beneath them was the faintest spark of something I had not felt in years. Hope. A week after Dr. Harris confronted me, I finally broke down when the pain in my chest became unbearable. Every breath felt like shards of glass scraping against my lungs, and when I tried to lift a patient from the stretcher to the bed, my vision blurred with agony. Susan caught me before I collapsed. She insisted I undergo scans, no more excuses, no more delays. I lay trembling under the cold weight of the X-ray machine, the sterile lights glaring above me like an interrogation. When the images appeared on the monitor, I saw Susan's jaw tighten. She called in the radiologist, Dr. Myers, and together they studied the scans. My heart sank when they pointed to the jagged lines across my ribs. 3 fractures, Susan said softly, her eyes flicking to mine. And these here healing fractures that look weeks old. "Laura, these are not the injuries of a clumsy girl. This is repeated trauma." I swallowed hard tears, stinging my eyes. There it was, in black and white, the truth carved into my bones. Years of denial stripped away in a single moment. The bruises, the pain, the excuses, they were not in my imagination. They were evidence undeniable and damning. Susan did not let me retreat into silence this time. She pressed the films into my hands. "These X-rays tell a story your family cannot erase. Do you understand? This is proof." My hands shook as I held the images, the reality almost too much to bear. I had always believed the lies that maybe I was dramatic, maybe I was clumsy, maybe I provoked Mark, but the truth was now staring back at me. My body had been a battlefield, and the scars were written deep. Susan scheduled a CT scan to assess further damage. When the results came back, they revealed even more evidence of an old concussion, untreated likely from when Mark had slammed my head with a textbook months earlier. My stomach churned as the radiologist explained how such trauma could have caused permanent issues. "You are lucky," he said, "but this pattern is consistent with ongoing abuse." The room spun as the word abuse echoed in my head. It was no longer a whispered accusation. It was a medical fact. Susan did not stop there. She ordered photographs of my bruises documentation to accompany the scans. A nurse gently lifted my scrub top to capture the purpling marks that traced my ribs and abdomen. Each click of the camera felt like a nail sealing the coffin of my family's lies. And then came the final blow. A police officer arrived at the hospital with surveillance footage from a gas station near our house. The video clearly showed Mark dragging me by the arm toward the old sedan, shoving me into the trunk while I kicked and thrashed. The timestamp matched the night I had almost frozen to death. There was no way to twist this, no way to call it clumsy or dramatic. It was abuse in motion captured on film. I stared at the grainy footage on the officer's tablet, my stomach twisting with both horror and relief. Horror because it was my nightmare replayed in front of strangers. Relief because finally someone else could see it too. Finally, I was not alone. That night, as I sat in the hospital room with the scans and reports piled beside me, Susan placed a hand on my shoulder. "Laura, I know you are scared, but silence will not protect you anymore. This evidence will." Her words carried weight heavier than any command my father had ever given. The fear inside me clashed with something new, something fragile but undeniable. Strength. For the first time, I realized I held the power to shatter the lies. My family could laugh, dismiss, call it a joke, but the X-rays would not laugh. The CT scans would not dismiss. The camera footage would not lie. My proof was louder than their denial. As I drifted into a restless sleep that night, the images haunted me, but they also comforted me. Every fracture, every bruise, every mark was no longer just pain. They were testimony. They were my voice when mine had been stolen. By the following morning, the decision was no longer mine to delay because Dr. Harris filed her mandated report as required by law. She explained it clearly while standing at the foot of my hospital bed, her tone steady but kind. "I am legally obligated to report suspected abuse when I see it, Laura. With the scans and the footage, there is no question. This has to go forward." My chest tightened with panic. "If you report this, my father will find out. He sits on the hospital board. He will destroy me. He will make sure no nursing program wants me." Susan shook her head firmly. "Your father's influence does not erase the truth. The law is on your side." Hours later, a detective arrived, a woman in her 30s, with sharp features and eyes that looked both tough and compassionate. She introduced herself as Detective Anna Rodriguez. She set down a recorder on the table beside my bed and said in a voice that brooked no nonsense, "Laura, I need you to start from the beginning." My throat went dry, fear clawing at me, but Susan gave me a reassuring nod. Slowly, I began to talk. I told her about Mark's drinking, the demands for money, the threats the night in the trunk. I spoke of the bruises brushed off as accidents, the textbook to the head, the snowbank suffocation, the endless dismissals from my parents. At first, the words came haltingly, then faster, as if years of silence were finally breaking loose. Detective Rodriguez listened without interruption, jotting notes, her expression serious. When I paused, trembling, she leaned forward. "Why did you stay, Laura?" she asked gently. Shame pricked my skin. Because I could not afford to leave. Because my father made me believe I was nothing without him. Because I thought silence would keep me safe. Anna's gaze softened. "That is what abusers want you to think. But you are not responsible for their actions." Her words made my chest ache with a strange relief, like a weight I had carried alone was finally being lifted by someone else. She collected the X-rays, the CT scans, the photographs, the gas station footage, carefully tucking them into evidence bags. Each item felt like another brick in the wall that would finally stand between me and my family's control. Before leaving, she placed a card in my hand. "This is my direct line. If your family tries to intimidate you, you call me. You are not alone anymore." After she left, I sat staring at the card, tracing the letters with my finger. Not alone. The phrase echoed louder than my father's voice had ever done. That evening, I heard his voice anyway, muffled through the hospital hallway. He had come furious, demanding answers from the administration. His tone carried like a storm. "How dare you keep me from my daughter? This is a family matter, nothing more." But for the first time, security guards stood between him and me. I saw him through the crack of the door, red-faced fists clenched, shouting at the nurse's station. Mom trailed behind him, her eyes red from tears, whispering to calm him always, to calm him, never to defend me. Mark was nowhere in sight, likely hiding from the investigation now that evidence was undeniable. My body trembled, but my spirit did not collapse. Instead of fear, there was a flicker of defiance. The fortress of silence my father had built around us was cracking, and the sound of his rage was not thunder anymore. It was desperation. For once, his authority did not silence me. The law was listening, and with every piece of evidence recorded with every note Detective Rodriguez had taken, I felt something rise inside me that I had not felt in years. Hope was no longer a whisper. It was a presence sitting beside me, steady and real. News of the investigation spread faster than my father could contain it, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear flicker behind his polished exterior. He stormed into the police station days later, his tie askew, his voice booming across the lobby. "My daughter is exaggerating. This is family business. How dare you drag our name through the mud?" His words ricocheted off the walls, but no one flinched because the officers had already seen the evidence. The scans, the photographs, the footage were stronger than his reputation. I sat in a side room waiting to give another statement, my hands trembling as I clutched Detective Rodriguez's business card, when through the glass window I saw him pacing like a caged animal, his face blotched red. For a man who had always controlled every narrative, every whisper in town, losing that grip was unbearable. Then Mark arrived. He smelled of alcohol even before the door swung open, and he tried to push past the officer at the front desk. "I need to see my sister," he slurred, eyes wild. "She will tell you the truth." The officer blocked him with a firm hand. "Sir, step back." Mark's face twisted, his voice rising into a shout. "She is lying. She always lies. You cannot keep me from her." He lunged again, but two more officers stepped in, holding him by the shoulders. I watched through the glass as his eyes darted, scanning until they landed on me. Our gazes locked, and for the first time, the smug arrogance was gone, replaced with something raw, fear. He knew the game was over. He shouted my name, demanding I defend him, but my voice stayed silent, my body rigid. I did not move toward him. I did not save him. The security staff dragged him back. His words slurred into curses, but the look in his eyes was etched into my memory. The predator had become prey. Meanwhile, my mother sat in the corner, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Tears streaked her face, yet she said nothing. She did not defend me, nor did she defend them. She simply sat broken between loyalty and guilt, her silence louder than any scream. Dad turned on her, barking, "Say something, Helen. Tell them it is not true." But she shook her head weakly, eyes fixed on the floor. For once, even she could not smooth the wreckage. The officers called me in, and as I walked past my father, I felt his glare like daggers on my skin. "Do you realize what you are doing to this family?" he hissed. I lifted my chin, my voice steady though my heart pounded. "I am telling the truth." Inside the interrogation room, I gave my statement once more, every detail of every incident, every bruise, every dismissal. The detective recorded it all, her expression unreadable, but her nods encouraging. When I finished, I felt emptied, yet lighter, as if the weight of years had finally been set down. Outside the door, I could still hear my father arguing with the captain, threatening lawsuits, invoking his position on the hospital board. But each demand grew weaker, each word more desperate as he realized power meant little when truth was carved into X-rays and captured on tape. Later that evening, as I was escorted out of the station under police protection, I saw Mark sitting in the holding cell, his head in his hands. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, like the walls were closing in around him the way they had closed in on me in the trunk. He lifted his head when he saw me, and for a fleeting moment his lips parted as if to beg, but no words came. I turned away. My father called out from the lobby one last time, his voice cracked with fury. "Laura, do not do this. You are destroying us." But I kept walking, because what he never understood was that they had destroyed me long ago, and now the only thing left was to bring the truth into the light. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and old paper, a place where truth and lies were stripped bare under fluorescent lights. I sat at the witness stand, my palms sweating as I gripped the edge of the chair, staring at the rows of faces. My father sat stiffly beside his attorney, his jaw clenched, his suit immaculate, though the dark circles under his eyes betrayed sleepless nights. Mark was hunched beside his public defender, his once arrogant shoulders slumped, his face, pale eyes darting nervously around the room. My mother sat behind them, clutching a tissue, her expression vacant, as if she had been hollowed out. The judge entered, and everyone rose. My chest tightened. This was the moment where silence would either consume me again or be broken once and for all. The prosecutor presented the evidence first. The X-rays and CT scans were projected on a large screen for all to see. The cracks in my ribs lit up like highways, the healing fractures like shadows of forgotten wars. The room was silent as the radiologist explained how these injuries could not come from clumsiness, how they formed a pattern consistent with abuse. The photographs followed images of bruises across my torso and arms, purple and yellow in ugly blossoms. I wanted to shrink into myself, ashamed, exposed, but I forced my chin up. These were not marks of weakness. They were proof. Then came the footage from the gas station, grainy but damning. The screen flickered with the image of Mark dragging me toward the sedan, shoving me into the trunk while I fought to escape. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. My father shifted uncomfortably, his attorney whispering furiously in his ear, but there was no argument strong enough to erase what everyone had just seen. When it was my turn to testify, my legs trembled as I stood, but Detective Rodriguez's steady gaze anchored me. I told the court about years of abuse, about the bruises dismissed, about the suffocating silence enforced in my home. My voice wavered at first, but then it strengthened, fueled by the memory of that freezing night in the trunk. It was not a joke, I said, staring directly at my father. It was abuse, and I survived. The prosecutor nodded with approval. The defense tried to undermine me, painting me as dramatic, insisting that siblings fight, that my injuries could have come from sports or clumsiness. But the evidence weighed heavier than their words. Susan Harris testified with calm authority, confirming her medical opinion that my injuries were signs of repeated violence. The radiologist backed her. The officer who retrieved the footage testified to its authenticity. Piece by piece, the case built into a wall my father's influence could not topple. The judge's gavel struck after hours of deliberation. The sentence was clear. Mark received 2 years of probation, mandatory rehabilitation for substance abuse, and a restraining order forbidding him from contacting me. My father was stripped of his position on the hospital board, his reputation shredded in the community. My mother received probation for failing to protect me and was ordered to attend counseling. The verdict rang in my ears like a bell of liberation. For years, their laughter had drowned me. Their gaslighting silenced me. But now, the gavel spoke louder than them all. As I left the courtroom, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions, microphones thrust forward. For the first time, I did not lower my head. I walked out with my shoulders back, breathing air that felt cleaner than anything I had inhaled in years. Behind me, I heard Mark call my name, his voice breaking, but I did not turn. My father muttered to his lawyer, his face ashen, his empire crumbling. My mother wept quietly into her hands. None of it mattered now. Justice had been carved into the record for all to see. That night, when I returned to my small dorm room at the nursing school campus, I sat by the window staring at the stars. I felt the scars on my ribs throb, a reminder of pain, but also of victory. For the first time, silence was not forced upon me. It was chosen a silence of peace, not suppression. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I had never known. Their control was broken. Their voices no longer defined me. The court had spoken, and so had I. After the trial, I packed my belongings into 2 worn suitcases and left the Mitchell house without looking back. Megan, my best friend from nursing school, met me at the curb with her old hatchback, her arms open and her smile fierce. "You are safe now," she whispered as she hugged me, and for the first time, I believed it. I moved into her small apartment, sharing a cramped bedroom filled with textbooks and laundry baskets, but the space felt like freedom. No slammed doors, no cruel laughter echoing through the walls, no fear of footsteps in the hallway. At night, I lay awake not from terror, but from the strange quiet of safety, a silence that soothed instead of suffocated. Therapy became my anchor. The counselor helped me unravel years of gaslighting, teaching me to separate truth from the lies I had been fed. Each session was a painful excavation, but also a rebuilding. I learned that I was not dramatic, not clumsy, not selfish. I was a survivor. My CNA shifts at the hospital took on new meaning. Every patient I lifted, every chart I filled, felt like a step toward independence. I saved every paycheck determined to fund my tuition without leaning on anyone else. The work was exhausting, but exhaustion from effort felt better than exhaustion from fear. Months passed, and the world around me shifted. Mark sent letters from rehab, scrawled apologies across lined paper. I opened the first one out of curiosity. He wrote that he was sorry, that he never meant to hurt me, that the counseling was forcing him to see the truth about himself. I read it once, folded it, and placed it in a drawer. I did not reply. Apologies did not erase years of pain, and forgiveness was not something I owed him. My father avoided me entirely. His pride shattered, his influence diminished. Rumors swirled about his fall from grace, and for once I felt no obligation to defend him. My mother sent occasional texts filled with apologies and excuses, but I learned to read them without absorbing the guilt. They were her burden to carry, not mine. Megan became my chosen family, her support constant. Together we studied late into the night, laughed over cheap pizza, dreamed about the nurses we would become. In her company, I discovered what family should have felt like all along: safe, encouraging, unconditional. Healing was not linear. There were nights I woke sweating from nightmares of the trunk mornings when the weight of memory pressed heavily on my chest. But each time I reminded myself that the worst was behind me. The past was carved into evidence, documented, judged, and closed. My future was mine to build, and with every exam passed, every paycheck saved, every night spent without fear, I was building it. 6 months later, I stood at the front of a lecture hall, my palms no longer trembling but steady as I adjusted the microphone. Rows of nursing students sat before me, their faces young and eager, reminding me of myself before everything unraveled. Behind me on the projector screen glowed an X-ray image of my fractured ribs. I took a breath and began. 6 months ago, I was not standing here as a student or a speaker. I was lying in a hospital bed, terrified, with my body telling the truth my voice could not. These images do not just show broken bones. They show years of silence, of abuse disguised as jokes, of a family's reputation placed above a daughter's safety. The room was hushed. I told them about mandated reporting, about the courage it took for Dr. Harris to insist on the truth about Detective Rodriguez, who listened without judgment, about how evidence can speak when words are smothered. As future nurses, I said, you may be the first to see signs of abuse. Trust your instincts. Ask the hard questions. You may be the only one who can give someone a voice. When I finished, the room erupted in applause, but the sound that lingered with me was the quiet sob of a young woman in the front row. She approached afterward, her hands shaking. "Your story helped me understand my patient," she whispered. "I think she is being hurt at home. Now I know I need to speak up." In that moment, I knew my pain had found purpose. Later that evening, I returned to Megan's apartment, our shared space now warm with laughter and the smell of pasta simmering on the stove. On my desk sat a letter from my parents. I opened it slowly. The handwriting was my mother's. "Dear Laura, we watched your interview on the local news. We are deeply sorry for failing you, for not protecting you when you needed us most. Your courage forced us to face our own failures." I folded the letter and set it aside. Their remorse was theirs to carry. My healing did not depend on their guilt. Instead, I glanced at the X-rays framed on my wall, not as reminders of trauma, but as testaments to survival. My father had called it a joke. The judge had called it abuse. I called it my rebirth. Standing at the window that night, the city lights glowing like scattered stars, I whispered to myself, I am not just surviving anymore. I am living. The silence around me was finally the right kind of silence, the silence of peace, of freedom, of justice that had been won and could never be taken back.